Webinars come in many shapes and sizes. Long webinars, short webinars, with a lot of slides, with no slides, with a small setup, with a big setup, with a guest speaker, or just you being the star of the show. But no matter how big your setup is or how long your awesome webinar is, one thing that is for sure is that you will always have to host your webinar from somewhere at some point. That's why today we are going to talk a little bit about why your hosting space for your webinars is so important. Let's go. But before I'm going to give you the tips for your hosting space, I have two reasons on why I think it is very important to have a dedicated space for your webinar. And the first reason is that you just have more capabilities and more available for just your webinar. And I'm going to give you an example because very recently we recorded a video, but it could have been a webinar as well, where we had these. This is a confetti cannon, and we had to shoot a video for a campaign which five people just popped these off at the same time, so the entire studio was filled with confetti. And I thought to myself, first of all, I have to clean up, of course, but also it is so nice that we have a very specific space to do those kind of things for the video, just for the video. You have a dedicated space. It doesn't matter if it's a mess. Of course, you gotta clean it, but it's not like the entire office was filled with confetti and nobody was able to work anymore. We just have the studio exactly for those type of things. So it is very good for your webinar to pop confetti, of course, but it's also very good for your webinar to have a dedicated space where you could just test things out, try new things, experiment, explore, and be just very creative without having to worry about your living space or your apartment or other parts of your office. The second reason is a little bit more of a psychological reason, because the first reason was actually very practical, like hey, you can just try things, be creative, break things, experiment, and then clean it up later so you don't have to worry about your house or your office or the space where you've created your dedicated webinar space. But the second reason is a little bit more psychological, and that has to do with it is already in the word, the dedicated space. If you create a space for your webinar and you say to yourself, hey, that space right there, or that corner in my room, or this small office within my office, so to say, is my dedicated webinar space, it is really, really, really awesome, because every time you go there, you think about webinars. You just think on, hey, I'm going to make my presentation there, I'm going to look at my setup there, I'm going to test things there, I'm going to do a dry run there, because it's just your dedicated webinar space. So if you are really serious about webinars, which of course I hope you do, because webinars are awesome, and you want to host webinars, just have a dedicated space for you to be like, hey, when I'm not there, I can think of anything else. I don't have to worry about the webinars, I don't have to worry about this, that, blah, 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 blah. But if you are there, you think about webinars and you think on how you can make money off of it, you improve your setup, like I mentioned. And once again, like I promised, I do have an example from our very own office, but not per se from our studio, but over there, well, you can see it of course, but behind the studio, we have created a sort of edit booth or edit space where we have like 4 computers purely for the editing. So when we do, for example, our WebinarVerse event, sometimes we have to subtitle webinars, or we just have to edit a lot of webinars. So me and Jan Willem, creative director here at WebinarGeek, we go to that space and we just sit next to each other for 6, 7, 8 hours, and we just purely focus on the editing of the WebinarVerse. So every time we have WebinarVerse, by the way, which is also on the 10th of October this year, 2024, we will probably be sitting there editing together, just the two of us, for 8 hours straight, just for the dedication for the WebinarVerse in that very specific edit space. So that is why I do think it is very good to have a dedicated webinar space. One is very practical and the other is very psychological. And now on to the tips. Starting with tip number 1, find a location and space, think of the size and the webinars that you want to host. And this is almost an exact replica of the first reason that I told you. I think it's just very awesome to have a dedicated space for your webinars where you can test and experiment. But you also need to think about the size, because if it's just you and the presentation and your laptop, you don't need like a very big TV studio type of hosting space. If you can just do it from your own small office at home or just behind your desk at your office or your work. But I do think it is important to think of size, because sometimes you do something crazy in your webinar that you didn't even think of, or you start to improvise a bit, and if the space is too small, then you don't allow yourself to have some type of improvisation or unexpected things that awesome unexpected things that can happen during your webinar because your space is too small. That would be also a bummer, so really think about the size of the space as well. Number 2, start small and build up from there. And yes, that also applies for the location. Because if you watch some of our YouTube videos, you know, and especially me, in a lot of videos I say, hey, start with a small webcam, then move up to a slightly larger camera and eventually go for a crazy Blackmagic or Sony or Canon camera or whatever it is you use. And it also applies for the location. As I told you, it's very important to think of the size of the location as well. And I think that if something happens, like I told you, if you are improvising or something unexpected happens and you think, hey, this was too small, my hands were like out of the shot, or otherwise that would be a little bit of mess, then you need to, of course, if you have taped it on the floor for your dedicated webinar space, which is another tip, tape it on the floor what your dedicated webinar space is. If you have a very large room and you want to have a very dedicated space for your webinars, just tape it on the floor. And the good thing about that is if you think, hey, it is too small, you can just make the tape square or something. You can make it a little bit bigger. Number 3, think about electricity, cables and other connections. Of course, if you're looking for a dedicated webinar space, as you all know, you need to charge your laptop or turn on your computer. You might need to charge a camera battery, you have some lights as well. So it is very important that you have good electricity and of course a Wi-Fi connection. So your space does need to have those type of things. And if your space only has one, don't worry, because you can always buy a couple of these. Number 4, I'm not going to explain too much about it because I already did in a lot of different videos, but I might make a separate video about this very specific topic. And that is, think about the external light part. Are there any windows? Do you have curtains? Do you have a very small window where light can come through? And if you watch those videos, you know that the sun can be your best friend, but also your worst enemy. So if you're thinking about choosing your webinar hosting space, do consider the external light from the sun or cars passing by, and it also applies of course for the sound. So do think about that, but especially with light, because nothing is worse than you hosting your awesome webinar, suddenly sunlight comes in, you don't have good curtains, and suddenly all your face is very white from the sunlight. So think about the external light situation before you settle on a specific location. And finally, think about your backdrop and other decorations, because I do think that your studio should always be somewhat of an empty canvas, because of course every webinar is just a beautiful, beautiful webinar on its own, and no webinar is the same. So I think it's very good if your space is flexible and versatile. That's why the curtains behind me are black, because I could put a plant there, I could put this closet there, I could put another desk there. It's just very, very versatile, which I think, especially for webinars, is very, very important as well. And if it's versatile, you can change decorations easily without thinking, oh, does that suit and match the color or something? No, because it's just a very awesome empty canvas for your webinar. And one final thing I want to say, and that's because I think I said something in the lines of think of it as an office and a second job. Yes, if you are very, very dedicated with hosting webinars, which of course I hope you are, then it's very good to have a dedicated space, but you don't need to put too much pressure on it. Like it's a second job and it's an office, but it's still your office. So if you have created a dedicated webinar space, please be there for your webinars, have fun there as well, and don't think, oh, this is the webinar space and I can't touch anything and it's just very, very special, and because then it becomes almost like a frightening thing to be there, even though it should be, just as the studio is here at WebinarGeek office, the most awesome place there is. So just be there, be cool, be chill, dedicate your space, especially to the webinars, think about the setup, and just have fun as always with enjoying webinars and hosting webinars. And that's it. If you enjoyed this video and you want to learn more about webinars and how to host them, what gear you use, and what it is like to work at a tech startup, subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to click like on this video and hit that notification bell. And let me know, how does your dedicated webinar space look like? Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next one. Bye!